Well, there's a couple items of channel business to attend to right at the top because the pace of events sure does quicken when all of a sudden one of your videos pops 46,000 views. What's that? 47,000, sorry. 2 years and 10 months to get to 250 subs, 19 days to get to 500. And obviously, I have you new subscribers to warmly thank for my newly minted status as a Tier 1 monetized YouTuber. Didn't really expect to ever get monetized on any level, so when I did the application and they said, we'll get back to you in under a month, my assumption was that a month would go by and they'd laugh at me and say no. But in the event, I think it took less than a day and a half for the approval to come through, so imagine that. So now I get to do memberships, super chats, super thanks, and some other things of which I have a dim to non-existent understanding. I haven't activated any of it yet. I think I've still got quite a bit of paperwork left to do, in fact, but since I know so little about any of this stuff, I would like to humbly appeal to the audience for their guidance vis-a-vis what sort of premium content they might like to see. I know the standard things that people do are exclusive content, early access to the regular content, and outtake reels. The only thing I know for certain is that I'm not doing that last one, because first of all, I have no outtakes. And second of all, because it seems a bit sleazy to charge people money for stuff that wasn't good enough and got left on the proverbial cutting room floor. But there is one thing I know for damn sure. If I'm allowed to do super chats, get ready for a hell of a lot more live streams, baby. In fact, before the end of the week, once I finish getting the administrative details ironed out and once our schedules align, you are all cordially invited to the inaugural filthy lucre brazen cash grab live stream starring Cap and Squatch. I don't know if I'm settled on the title yet, but it'll be something close to that. And I know that big furry bastard is probably going to demand 50% of the cut from the revenue, which I am happy to grant, obviously, but make no mistake about one thing. Jim Eagle, you get no money. You will continue working hellishly long hours in brutal conditions with no compensation or praise, and you will like it. I better not hear any belly aching either, because I can replace your ass in a heartbeat, dude. There's plenty of other guys willing to sit in that chair who bear a striking resemblance to Bobby Sixkiller from Renegade, who will be happy to work for free, so just mind yourself is all I'm saying. For the rest of you, be sure and bring your wallets, because I know how long some of you have yearned for the opportunity to send me your hard-earned money, and since apparently the universe would rather I be a song and dance man than a monologuing satirist, think of me as some poor down-on-his-luck street musician busking in a lonely bus station, and think of that super chat as my upturned hat on the ground, into which your overriding sense of human empathy impels you to toss some spare change in the forlorn hope that I might use it to improve my wretched condition in life, when you know perfectly well I'm probably just going to spend it on booze. Jim Eagle, play something thematically appropriate for the occasion. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I have never once spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And the biggest corruption scandal in U.S. presidential history continues to pick up steam, as we thought it might. But despite the most heroic efforts of the fake news media performance artists to make the damn thing go away any way they can, in the last half century, the deep state and the fake news media have successfully driven two Republican presidents from office, Nixon and Trump, and conversely, the very same people have worked just as hard giving foot massages and loving tongue baths to obviously corrupt Democrat presidents, Clinton, Obama, and now the big guy. But these current antics are quite unlike anything we've seen before, I think. Why? Because it is far beyond any reasonable argument that Joseph R. Biden Jr. is a crook. The people have got to know whether their president's a crook. Well, Joe Biden is a crook. He is a serial liar by any definition of the word lying. He is a serial fraudster by any definition of the word fraud. He is a serial bribe taker by any definition of the word bribery. But no, now we have the people who call themselves professional journalists, the people who demand that you and I trust them implicitly and get very upset when we don't. They are twisting themselves into just ridiculous pretzel shapes of intellectual incoherence, trying to portray the most shockingly incompetent, most endemically corrupt leader in the history of Western democracy as some sort of ethically upstanding master statesman who also happens to be a loving and devoted dad and grandpa. Even Baghdad Buckwheat, a woman who lies for a living and not very well, seems like she can't take it anymore. We're seeing that slimy greaseball John Kirby take more and more of the press briefings, and to his credit, I guess, he at least is a better liar than Baghdad Buckwheat is, with the added benefit that he is occasionally able to string together an intelligible sentence without reading it out of a binder. But there's one thing he will never be, and that is the first black, lesbian, gay, immigrant, female, homosexual woman of color ever to be the White House press secretary. She is an historic figure. Ask her, she'll tell you. But I guess even historic figures have their limits. In fact, we've seen kind of an interesting shift these last couple weeks as the bad news continues to multiply for the president and his degenerate stripper-impregnating crackhead son, who's so off his head on drugs he absent-mindedly leaves bags of coke laying around the West Wing, allegedly, because Biden's number one public water carrier is no longer his press secretary or even his backup press secretary, but a freshman member of Congress by the name of Daniel Goldman, who first rose to national prominence as the lead prosecutor in the first Donald Trump fake impeachment, you remember, when they tried to throw him out of office for having the temerity to suggest investigating allegations of corruption against the Bidens that have proved pretty much 100% true and accurate. And then somehow, this sniveling, rodent-faced douchebag somehow managed to get himself elected to Congress from the New York 10th District. And the dude really seems to have no function except being the political equivalent of Lieutenant Frank Drebin standing out in front of the exploding fireworks factory telling people, please move along, nothing to see here. Now, I don't know that I have ever seen a man make a bigger fool of himself trying to slather lipstick onto somebody else's pig. So naturally, it makes you wonder, what the hell is in it for this guy? Why run for Congress just to engage in acts of ritual public self-humiliation trying to run interference for a man who everybody knows is the most corrupt public official of the last 100 years? I mean, when he was the lead attorney for the fake impeachment circus, it's easier to excuse this sort of behavior then because back then he was just doing his job. But now, this guy's being sent out to do damage control assignments that are so unenviable they normally fall all the way to Eric Swalwell. But at least Goldman never farted on live TV or banged a Chinese spy that we know of. As you know, you don't need me to remind you, Joe Biden has been swearing up and down for years now, repeatedly in very unequivocal terms, that he has never, not once, not one time ever spoken to any member of his family about their assorted business ventures in which they run some sort of enterprise that makes no product and performs no service but somehow rakes in tens of millions of dollars per year and requires 20 LLC shell companies. I'm sure there's a non-corrupt explanation, right? Yeah, you have to admire the Bidens for their brazenness, if nothing else. Most racketeers and gangsters at least pretend to be engaged in some sort of legitimate above-board business venture because that's the prudent thing to do when you're engaged in a highly lucrative criminal enterprise. So that if law enforcement starts sniffing around one day, you've got something to throw them off the scent of your criminal activity. So you open up a restaurant chain or a construction company so that when the cops start getting suspicious, you can throw up your hands and say, hey, I am just an honest businessman who happens to do really, really, really well for himself. So what if my little restaurant has a 6,000% profit margin? We make really good food here. What can I say? But not the Bidens, baby. They don't concern themselves with any of those histrionics. It's almost like they operate with no fear of legal ramifications. It's almost like they're accustomed to the implicit assurance that if any public official in any country tries to investigate them, that guy will be immediately fired or impeached. And frankly, it seems like they have had good reason to think that because, folks, these people are not galaxy-brain criminal masterminds. They really are quite a bunch of idiots, in fact. Smart people don't write incriminating text messages on their personal iPhone and back it up to the cloud. Smart people don't put things in writing like 10% held by H for the big guy in the belief that nobody could ever know what and whom they are talking about. Smart people don't abandon laptop computers containing a years-long evidence trail of criminal malfeasance by their entire extended family. Smart people don't make unequivocal public statements that are absurd on their face and easily proven as lies. But then, this is the same Joe Biden who, back in 1987, during his first of many failed runs for the presidency, thought he could steal his campaign stump speech from Neil Kinnock and nobody would ever find out. So I guess the rotten apple doesn't fall very far from the diseased tree, does it? So now we have Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's so-called business partner, testifying under oath before the House Oversight Committee that, contrary to every word Joe Biden has ever said on the matter, he was deeply and intimately involved in this whole sleazy enterprise. According to Archer, they used to do this routine where Hunter is trying to shake down some foreign company or government or what have you, and he would seal the deal by demonstrating that, hey, you guys watch this. I can get the Vice President of the United States on the phone any damn time I want. He would dial up Joe, put him on the speakerphone. Joe would mumble some assorted nonsense sounds, and the target of the shakedown would immediately start scratching checks with lots of zeros on them. Or in the case of Burisma, they would offer to pay Hunter $80,000 a month for smoking crack and banging hookers and never going to Ukraine. All sounds pretty cut and dried, doesn't it? Joe Biden was very obviously lying out his ass on purpose each time he flatly denied any involvement in the business ventures of his profligate scumbag son. We have it directly from the mouth of the man who was more intimately involved in this racket than anybody not named Biden. Oh, but it's not so cut and dried after all. Not in a world where CNN and Congressman Dan Goldman both exist and share in common the same complete lack of shame. So now we've got Goldman with flop sweat pouring down his face like freaking Ted Stryker in Airplane, insisting to the press that of course there is a perfectly innocent, non-corrupt explanation for all that stuff Devin Archer said. You see, when Joe got on the speakerphone with those Ukrainian oligarchs, it's just because he wanted to say hello and ask how the weather was in Kiev. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Not if you try. But again, I go back to the question of Goldman's motivation. Why would a man be willing to publicly humiliate himself like this in order to protect a family as comically sleazy and evidently doomed as the Bidens? The only answer I can fathom is that there's some sort of quid pro quo happening here. In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they installed Goldman in Congress for the express purpose of being Joe Biden's rodent-faced attack dog. Except they should have gotten somebody less stupid for that job, because that's kind of the awesome thing about Goldman. Each time he opens up his face hole trying to explain away the corruption of the first family, he winds up totally wrecking some part of the official narrative just in the last 7 days. He's talked himself into a circle asking a witness a question in which he just unwittingly destroyed the whole canard about Joe and Hunter never talking business. Then he said Joe was just trying to be polite and make small talk with Hunter's dinner guests. Then he said that ridiculous thing about the weather in Kiev. And for his final act, he tried to hide behind a corpse. This is a quote where he is attempting to argue that, hey, Joe and Hunter talk every day, and this speakerphone routine only happened, a couple dozen times over 10 years, so obviously it's perfectly innocent and not a big deal at all. Quote, now, he did this about 20 times over 10 years, and this is someone who was speaking to his father every day, especially when Beau Biden, Hunter's brother and President Biden's son, was very ill with cancer and then passed away. Close quote. When all else fails and you find yourself in a rhetorically untenable position from whence you need to be extricated immediately, just hide behind the dead guy. But then, that's a trick he learned from the big guy himself, who loves nothing more than using his dead son for political cover. Oh, did I tell you I've got a dead son who's deceased? Yeah, he died. He's dead. Died in Iraq from burn pit fumes. Either that or he died in Delaware from brain cancer. I never can remember which one it is. Depends on which audience I'm talking to that day, really. If I'm talking to bereaved military families, then he definitely died in Iraq. And I know exactly what they're going through because I am Joe Biden, Gold Star Dad. But the important thing is, I've got a dead son who passed away, who's no longer living. So stop asking me questions about incompetence and corruption. Can't you see I've got a dead son? And it's the exact same thing the fake news performance artists do to excuse Hunter's behavior. Oh, he was struggling with addiction at the time, so only an evil monster would try to hold him responsible for his own actions. And that is one hell of a moral standard, really. It's a standard that says you can commit any criminal act, steal as much money as you like, impregnate as many strippers as you see fit, and as long as you were high on crack at the time, well, you should get a free pass and be absolved of all accountability for decade after decade of bad judgment and even worse behavior. You know, I learned about that legal theorem back when I was attending the Afro Man's School of Law. It's called the because I got high defense. I wasn't going to stab that dude, but then I got high. I wasn't going to swerve into that minivan and kill a family of 6, but then I got high. We find the defendant not guilty, Your Honor, because he got high. Because he got high. Because he got high. I bet James Brown would have appreciated that same treatment that time when he took one too many rips off with a glass dong and whooped on his old lady back in 1997 or whenever it was. I guess it really is a white man's world after all. Maybe the CRT race hucksters have been right this whole time and we're the ones eating crow with egg on our face. Now, Joe Biden is the most corrupt president in history. He's also the worst president in history. I used to qualify that last statement by saying the worst president ever elected in his own right, allegedly. But I've seen enough at this point that I'm ready to award him the undisputed title. And it takes a lot of work to surpass the spectacular, epoch-shattering incompetence of accidental presidents like John Tyler and Millard Fillmore, and especially Andrew Johnson. But Joe Biden has managed to pull it off, which is probably the closest thing he has to a noteworthy achievement after 51 years in Washington, including 36 years as a senator, during which he only authored one major piece of legislation, which he now disavows as a racist monstrosity. But hey, at least in that disavowal, he tacitly admitted to being a racist. And we should expect nothing less from the last living segregationist senator who didn't want white kids going to school in a racial jungle. Probably the most unintentionally honest thing this inveterate liar has ever said in his entire damn life. And if you came here expecting to see pictures of shirtless Joe relaxing on the beach, I would hate to see you leave disappointed. So feast your eyes on this piece of beefcake, ladies and gentlemen. That is the leader of the free world, right there. Drink in that image. Drink it good and hard. And then go drink something stronger to get the image out of your head. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Stay tuned for Hotel California coming soon. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.